There are various economic schools of thought, but the two main ones are the Keynesian school of thought and the classical economic school of thought. Classical economists have really been around for several centuries now. The primary classical economist is Adam Smith. And Adam Smith wrote his famous work, The Wealth of Nations, in 1776. And then there were many classical economists who wrote important pieces after Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and Karl Menger, Friedrich Hayek, Henry Hazlitt, and lately Milton Friedman is primarily a classical economist also. Prominent Keynesian economists include, of course, John Maynard Keynes himself, who wrote most of his major works in the 1920s and the 1930s. And then you also have economists like John Kenneth Galbraith, Paul Samuelson, Alan Blinder, Robert Reich, and so forth. Politically, in the United States, most people would agree that Democrats line up, at least fiscally, mostly with the Keynesian economic philosophy, and Republicans, at least according to their economic philosophy, mostly line up with the classical economic philosophy. Economists that support John Maynard Keynes are primarily for what we call active government involvement. Active government involvement. We'll abbreviate that here. Classical economists are primarily for what's called limited government involvement. So what is limited government involvement? So what is active government involvement? Well, active government involvement means, for example, that if we have a recession, that the government would get involved. John Maynard Keynes said that the government, for example, would want to increase government spending. So if it was spending $1,000 billion and the economy was in a recession, then John Maynard Keynes might say, well, let's increase government spending to $1,100 billion or $1,200 billion. He was also in favor of reducing taxes. So either increase government spending or reduce taxes. And the other thing, in terms of monetary policy, he was in favor of increasing what's called the money supply. All that in order to reduce the recessionary effects, and in other words, increase gross domestic product. Classical economists did not think that active government involvement in cases of recessions would be beneficial for the economy. They actually recognized that it might be beneficial in the short run, but in the long run it would cause problems, because if you increase government spending or if you lower taxes, then it might lead to greater deficits and higher national debts. An increase in money supply might increase inflation, and also in the long run. So Keynes recommended government action that would benefit primarily the short run, whereas classical economists were more interested in maintaining economic health for the long run. Because Keynes emphasized spending during recessionary times, Keynesian economists are known as demand-side economists. They emphasized the demand side of the economy, purchasing, spending, and so forth. Whereas the classical economists are known as more supply-side economists. Classical economists emphasize that production or productivity, the business side, would eventually in the long run help the economy get better and help them get out of a recession if there is a recession. Classical economists would support the government to get less involved during recessionary times. They might even say that the recession could have been caused by too much government involvement, by taxes being too high, by regulations being too excessive, and just in general by businesses not being encouraged to produce enough. So their recommendation would be to lower taxes to lessen regulations and for the government in general to get less involved and for businesses to be encouraged to produce more and for workers to be encouraged to work more. In terms of savings, classical economists also would encourage in the long run more savings because for people, if people save more, there would be more money in banks and stocks and bonds and so forth. That would lower interest rates and that would also encourage more business entrepreneurship. Keynesians, on the other hand, would actually want savings to go down if there is a recession, because Keynesians want spending to go up. So if people save more, they would not spend as much, and so therefore Keynesians wanted people to spend more and actually save less. So in terms of the role of savings, the two theories are completely opposite.